good afternoon, almost everyone. We're not quite to noon. So standing between us and lunch is a very worthy panel, just so you all need to remember that. Kemba, thank you so much for coming back, so to speak, to spend this day with us. You were here last year in a different capacity. And so we're very excited to have you back. As I said, all of the co-chairs will be here except for Jen Ellis, who is preparing for Coronation Day. So you've been acting National Cyber Director since February. Can you tell us a little bit about the priorities that you came into the conversation with before I know you all want to hear about the strategy, and we're going to get there, don't worry. But first, how did you come into the conversation, and what priorities did you bring in?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be among friends. You are my people. I appreciate this. It's crazy that it's been 2 years since the first Ransomware Task Force report came out and the Ransomware Task Force convened. So I came in as acting National Cyber Director February 15th while I was at the Munich Security Conference, just before bringing cybersecurity to a panel discussion with the former president of Estonia and the current president of Latvia, I believe, which was, I think, the first time that the Munich Security Conference had in it a cyber conversation, which was kind of exciting. So that was my first act, my first day as National Cyber Director. My priorities, if some of you know that I used to play the piano, so this is gonna have to use an analogy here. I view cyber sort of like as an orchestra. And so my priorities, like an orchestra, like a symphony, have several movements to them. The first movement when I came in as PD and CD was to make sure that we stood up the office and hired fantastic people. The second movement then was the National Cybersecurity Strategy. So we were in the sort of transition, waiting for the National Cybersecurity Strategy to be able to launch when I was transitioning as well. So my first official act out of the White House after Munich Security Conference was launching the National Cybersecurity Strategy. Since then, the next several movements have been about implementation, the implementation planning process. And my other priority then is making sure that we have our workforce education strategy out. So those are the movements of the symphony that I feel that we're moving along. So those are my priorities.
Terrific. And I imagine that your experience in the different roles that you've had, both your current role, but also your time at DHS, then at Microsoft, have influenced your time here back in government. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about, especially about, for this audience, we are all about Pillar 2, not all about, right? We do need all of the movements, yeah, including in the strategy, to really make an impact. But how did your time prior to coming to the White House influence your perspective in implementing and developing the strategy?
So I'll give you three thoughts. The first is that I spent a decade at DHS, worked in a couple of law firms, worked in the judicial branch as a law clerk, and work at a tech firm. All of those experiences have come to bear in what I do on a daily basis. It's one of the things that drove me back into the government, other than the White House calling and asking for me to come back, was just the excitement around how we are collaborating between the public sector, the private sector, academia, civil society. That was a driving factor for me. And understanding perspectives, I also teach, perspectives from each one of those sectors allows me then to drive intimate collaboration from my vantage point. So that's the first point. The other two, I will, because of the audience here, we're celebrating Ransomware Task Force gaining ground, 2 years of implementation impact. I'll give you two more, just from my experience with the Ransomware Task Force. Some of you might know I was one of the original co-chairs of the Ransomware Task Force. The things I learned there was that you can actually sprint a marathon. And I feel like Michael Daniels' term, I feel like I'm sprinting a marathon and deliver good outcomes at the same time. The National Cyber Strategy was sprinting a marathon. I'm sprinting a marathon in the implementation planning process. We're sprinting a marathon on the workforce strategy. And so that is an actual thing that can happen and can happen productively. But in all seriousness, being a part of the Ransomware Task Force, I got an intimate look and started thinking about policy solutions around how cybercrime, what the process is, what the chain is in cybercrime, how it works. And with respect to Pillar 2, then that I was allowed then to take that experience, broaden it. So we look at BEC, we look at other cybercrime, we look at nation state actors, we look at transnational organizational criminals, we look at any variety of threats to figure out how to disrupt and dismantle and where the pain points are. That was key to my perspective, openly and honestly, to how I think about dismantling and disrupting.
So we've been talking about dismantling and disrupting. I think it's crescendoing to stick with the music analogy here. What would you say is new and unique about the way disrupting and dismantling activity is framed in the strategy?
So first I'll say that the strategy takes an affirmative approach. Before I get to the Pillar 2, the strategy takes an affirmative approach. It's a 10-year sort of strategic document and articulates what we want our digital ecosystem to look like, right? So we want something that's defensible and resilient and aligned with our values. Okay, so that's the premise of the strategy. We're getting better at defending, and we need to get even better, right? So it's not just about the 10-year outlook, though that's important and that's foundational, that's key. We're also very realistic that we need to get better at defending, dismantling, disrupting. So Pillar 2 is more about leaning into our authorities, leveraging partnerships in a productive way to do that, right? So it's taking a more proactive approach. It's really putting into policy the concept that defense is the new offense, but really moving forward. So for example, we are focused on public-private partnership in a new way, in a way that in lessons learned that when we started engaging or looking at the Russian aggression in Ukraine, how do we share intelligence better that's operational? How do we find solutions together? And then how do we deploy together? What are the authorities that we can lean into? And as it relates to cybercrime, where do we dismantle? Where do we disrupt? And how do we leverage resources to do that? So you've heard me say before here in this forum, we think about ransomware, and it's a good illustration because ransomware is really the malware at the end of a long chain of criminal activity. So it's a good example. You can shift the balance of how easy it is to get into cybercrime and how profitable it is, right? You can throw sand in the gears to make it costly to execute some sort of cybercrime, for a nation state to execute some sort of attack. Throw sand in the gears. There are some opportunities for doing that. And then how do you attack profits, right? So those are some of the policy solutions, some of the things that we're thinking about. You can arrest your way out of it. That's not really the most effective and efficient process. You can pull down infrastructure. One of the steps for pulling down infrastructure, as we articulated in the strategy, was know your customer, having cloud service providers understand who their customers are so they can minimize the nefarious use of infrastructure, or you can attack their profits, right? And that's the digital ecosystem, the digital currency ecosystem.
Yes, and we do have a panel. Probably you're going to have to go to some other things this afternoon, so you'll miss that. But we stay tuned for that conversation around the illicit use of cryptocurrencies and the role that it plays in ransomware. Thinking about the ONCD and the strategy talks about integrating federal disruption activities. Mm-hmm. Some might say, well, what's the role of ONCD in thinking about something that sort of moves closer to operational activities? And for the lawyers in the room, we know that elements of the White House generally are not involved in operational activities for longstanding reasons now. But there is also, I think, obviously a strategic role for the office. So can you talk a little bit about how the office is thinking about this integration of federal disruptive activities? Yeah,
please. Thank you for that question. And thanks for admitting that you're a lawyer, because I can admit then I'm a lawyer too. So you're right. The White House has a minimal role in operational activities, and our Office of the National Cyber Director, is large for the White House. We're intended to be strategic in nature. We've got 80 and growing sort of expert staff in our midst. But that's a small operational footprint. So that's intentional. However, and I've written it down because I don't practice law anymore. The law,
I don't
our
either.
statute, I'm not supposed to practice law anymore. Our statute is very clear about how we drive this. And so I'll give you the 4 pieces of that. One is to make sure that we have integrated operational plans, processes, and playbooks. That is in our statute. And we're executing that space with departments and agencies right now. The next is that we are here to make relevant recommendations to the president on the appropriate level of integration and operability across federal cyber centers. That's reflected in our national cyber strategy, and that is an activity that we're undertaking now. And you'll see that in our implementation planning efforts. The third is that we're providing support for the integration of defensive cyber plans and capabilities with offensive cyber plans and capabilities in a manner that's consistent with improving the cybersecurity posture of the nation. If you think about a soccer match, you've learned something new about me. I like analogies. You have defense and offense on the field at the same time. They're playing the same game, but you can't have an effective offense without understanding defense and vice versa. And so that's an area where we're driving from a strategic point of view. And for this audience in particular, we have some responsibility in naming members of the Joint Ransomware Task Force. So that's the legal construct in which we operate, and we're executing on each one of those in different ways.
Terrific. I appreciate the specific articulation, because as lawyers, we like words are chosen carefully. As Leonard Bailey, who I think is in the room, taught me a long time ago. In any event, we are, as an organization, thankful for the work of the office in standing up and identifying members of the Joint Ransomware Task Force. And obviously, the Pillar 2 sits within that effort that's identified in the strategy, sits within the broader strategy. So can you share a little bit more about how Pillar 2 sits within the strategy and how it's integrated within the strategy?
Well, I said it at the outset that the fundamental principle in the strategy.
We're celebrating too, not quite that much yet.
Fellow original co-chair. So I said at the outset, the core of the strategy is to look at an affirmative plan for having a defensible, right? How do we rebalance cybersecurity risk from individuals and small businesses and small communities to those that are able to bear it and buy it down? So having a more inherently defensible, more inherently resilient, right? What are the strategic investments that we need to make in not just the technology, but the people and doctrine pieces of this? Digital ecosystem that's aligned with our values, understanding that technology does not organically have a value system. It's the people that own and operate it that bring value to it, right? And so I've lost track of the question now. But
Pillar 2 within all of the 5
pillars.
Pillar 2
within all that. So Pillar 2 is really about making sure that we are resilient while we're also making sure that we continue to defend. It's part of an entire ecosystem. So Pillar 1 is focused on critical infrastructure and raising that cybersecurity baseline. Pillar 2 is how do we do better at defense? How do we make defense the new offense? How do we make sure that we are, once we do shift cybersecurity risk and have those that are more capable buy it down, how do we make sure that we're more defensible in that space? And then the other pillars follow along, but that's intentional, right? It's part of the defensibility part, it's part of the resilience part. All of this is in an international context. And so even though Pillar 5, that really is an API for our international cybersecurity strategy that's forthcoming, exclusively talks about international, it's weaved throughout the entire strategy, right? So the disrupt and dismantle piece of it includes working with our international law enforcement partners, leveraging our partnerships with private sector entities that own and control the critical infrastructure, using more tools that we haven't really leaned into before to really get after and disrupting and throwing sand in the gears of transnational organized crime, nation state criminal activity, and et cetera. That's sort of how it fits into the whole.
Thanks for that. So just to drill down a little bit further on Pillar 2, and the emphasis that the strategy places on public-private partnerships and collaboration with the private sector. The strategy talks and identifies the NCIJTF and NCFTA, but in thinking about sort of a model role for public-private partnership, can you talk a little bit about the role of NCIJTF in that, in the way that the strategy frames that idea?
Sure, and I should have known you were going to bring up NCIJTF. So let me broaden it out a bit, and not exclusively on NCIJTF. We have several federal cyber centers that were designed for specific purposes over time, all with good intention. The trick now is to make sure that they are all interoperable and usable and achieve the objectives that they are intended to achieve. And so the National Cyber Strategy on the NCIJTF, for example, and all the federal cyber centers is really focused on that resilience piece. What are the strategic investments that we need to make in order to ensure that the NCIJTF is functional and meets the stated objectives, that it allows for better public-private collaboration, something more than information sharing, and how do we use it to deploy defensive operations together? That's not just true for the NCIJTF, that's true for all the federal cyber centers, and that's a study that we're undertaking right now.
Terrific. Well, we look forward to the results of that study.
Yeah.
We have a few minutes left, so before we turn to audience questions, and I will endeavor to keep us on track and online. So be thinking of, you all can fight for the mic. No, don't fight. I do want to ask you about what you're thinking about as your legacy for having served in this role. And we're all, I think, I'll speak for myself to say it's terrific to have someone with your experience in this role. I think bringing this diversity of experience is critical to really driving success on cybersecurity for the government, in collaboration with the private sector, civil society, and others. But how are you thinking about your legacy? Is it thinking about the final movement, or would you say more about that?
Oh man, so I wanted two things. First, you mentioned it's great to see the diversity of perspective. Diversity is America's superpower, right? Diversity of perspective, diversity of experience. I don't think there's any culture or country quite like ours. We need to lean into it. It's our competitive edge. Cybersecurity is sticky, complicated at times issue. We need complex thought in order to get after it. And the only way you get that is by diversity of perspective, diversity of experience, diverse opportunities for getting after it. But here's the legacy I want. Throughout my entire career, my objective is to make sure that communities feel safe in the analog world, to thrive and prosper. That is true in the digital world. At the end of the day, cybersecurity belongs to everybody. I need to pull it out of the ivory tower as an august academic exercise and make it real. Right. So while we're shifting the burden of cybersecurity risk, it doesn't necessarily absolve everybody from understanding or being a part of the cybersecurity picture. Digital ecosystem has to be safe and secure so that we're able to do all the things that we expect it to do. Right. But the enduring legacy that I want this office to have is that we make the American public safer. That's it.
Well, we look forward to continuing to partner with you in achieving your legacy objectives. So with this, I'm going to, checking the time, turn to the audience. And since Gavin was first, I will wait for Zoe to make her way over to Gavin. And Gavin, do you mind also sharing your affiliation, just so Kemba, she doesn't know you?
Gavin Wild, Carnegie Endowment. First off, thank you for your public service. And secondly, over the last 2 years, it does seem like initially the ransomware issue itself seemed to take on, countering it seemed to be viewed primarily through maybe a national security and military prism. Mm-hmm. But DOJ, and I promise Megan hasn't bribed me to say this, DOJ seems to have really come into its own in countering this threat, especially over the last year. Can you kind of walk us through how the administration viewed the evolution of the administration's approach to ransomware as it looked at all the tools in its toolkit, but particularly from a law enforcement one and a transnational cooperation in law enforcement one, the degree to which there was some intentionality behind that evolution?
So thank you for that question. So I think the key pivot point for the administration is when the president articulated that ransomware is a national security concern. And that allowed us to make policy choices around how we treat ransomware across all departments and agencies, right? That's the pivotal moment. That's the change that you're seeing bear fruit now across all departments and agencies.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, Amit, formerly head of cybersecurity at Intel, now CEO and co-founder of a new company, Open Policy, that aims to democratize access to policies. This is the first tech-enabled service company that services policy, with the hopes of truly allowing more communities from all backgrounds to participate in the conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Walden, for your thoughts. I want to ask you two questions. One, how do you see the role of the emerging focus on product security and baseline security practices? And of course, we have seen that narrative in the strategy, and we are excited to see the IoT security labeling program coming out of the White House in collaboration with all parties. And we have seen the focus in Europe with the EU Cyber Resilience Act. So how do you see the role of on-device and product security features helping us to combat ransomware and helping with resilience? And the second question, if time permits, is how can we scale our ability to get to more audiences, even more than we have, of course, in this room today, to take part in the conversation? Because to your excellent point, which is truly inspiring, we need those diverse perspectives, and not all of them are in DC.
Thanks, Amit, for those questions. I'll be brief because I want to make sure I get there's a lot of answers I have here for you. I'll start with the last one first. How do we get the messaging out? So our workforce and education strategy is really focused not just on workforce, but on digital skills, raising baseline awareness around how do we make sure that we have a safe digital ecosystem. So it's looking at it from outside in. We have the cyber workforce. The vacuum there is a national security problem from my perspective as a national security lawyer, but it's also an economic opportunity. And so how do we leverage that, right? What's the pipeline? How do we raise awareness from those that implicate the cyber workforce? But what are we doing in our schools? What are we doing as we build out broadband through the bipartisan infrastructure law? How are we making sure that those that are now going to have better access, and that's good, are able to feed into the pipeline? How are we raising their digital ecosystem, digital skills? The second, the question about product security, and a core tenet in our strategy is secure by design. And we've driven federal cohesion around that, and not just the hardware, but also the software. At its base, and we have a lot of ideas, a lot of tools in the strategy, right, including shifting liability consequences. But at its base, there has to be some level of harmonized standards, harmonized regulations. We need to be able to reward those that build security into their products while also helping others raise the baseline. So we're doing that type of gap analysis now, and I'm also very pleased that NIST launched yesterday the National Standards Strategy, and a lot of the conversation yesterday during that launch was harmonizing standards, which is a base before you get to the regulations. So we're trending in the right direction as an administration.
Thanks. I mean, I think the standards question and thinking about all of the elements, all of the movements of the strategy is a terrific way to conclude our conversation. So in order to get Kemba back to doing her day job, in addition to talking with us and to keep us on track for the rest of the afternoon. So thank you so much again for making time to talk with us today. Thanks for your support before you entered as a co-chair, and thanks for your service to the country.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work that RTF does. Thank you.